Go Blue. We're talking Michigan football with Steve Deace. He has the Michigan podcast. You can catch him on Twitter as well, at Michigan Podcast. It's very easy to remember. And also look up Michigan Podcast on YouTube, and you will find him there. Steve, we appreciate you jumping on board. Thanks for the discussion here. I'll ask you before we get started, anywhere else we can find you?
Yeah, I do lots of different things, primarily in the news talk world. That's how I do my day job. If people want to learn more about that, they can follow me at Steve Deace Show, DEACE. And I just started this a couple of weeks ago as a labor of love. I've got my parent company, CRTV, put a six-figure TV studio here in my office for me to do content for them. And we were sitting around here about a month ago, and we're all huge college football nerds and college sports nerds. I'm an obnoxious Michigan fan, Mark. I mean, my home, I've got in my basement man cave, I've got two great rooms, and they're each painted maize and blue, but the actual serial color numbers of the official university logo. I'm that guy, okay? So we were just sitting around here thinking, we've got this huge studio. What are we doing with it all day when we get done with our own stuff? Hey, let's put together something for the Wolverines. You love doing it anyway, and let's see what happens. And so that's how we began, and we put it up as a podcast on iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play. We actually ended up getting, for our first episode, we got as high as number 2 on iTunes in the college and high school sports category. And that's just with, I've been a longtime subscriber to the Michigan sites on Scout and Rivals, and they were kind to let me post links up there. And just word of mouth, that's it. And so it kind of helps when you are also a fan of the school that has the largest living alumni body in the world. That gives you a lot of potential targets to reach.
Well, hopefully we can reach a few more people for you right here. I would say, you being a Michigan fanatic, you don't want to delve too far into my video library on MarkRogersTV. Just keep in mind, Steve, that I cover everyone. So you're going to see the hated team from down south with the scarf.
But Mark, I'm a nerd. Every year, since I was in the 10th grade, I put together my own college football preview. I will know almost, by the time we get to the 1st of August, I'm pretty much going to know, as an idiot savant, everybody's starting lineups in major conferences around the country. I'm the guy, if you ever wondered, hey, who's the loser during the offseason that watches like the games from the 70s on YouTube? I'm the guy that does it. I sit up, 1, 2 in the morning, I can't sleep. Like right now, I am literally going through the entire 1985 college football season for fun, because on YouTube they allow you to tag the games. So you can watch the games in the order in which they actually were played. And so following the season, you can find some of the games, they're up there full with the commercials and everything else. It is a real hoot to watch that stuff. So I'm a nerd for this stuff. I can't get enough of it.
Hey, Steve, if you keep talking, you're going to knock me off my channel, because not that you keep my channel, but there's people that put me in that standing. I don't know if I can compete with that. I am the guy that, if your company's looking to throw some money away, you talked about the six-figure studio there. If they're looking to move in any other direction in terms of throwing money around, I'm the guy that's got about 35 years of college football preview magazines and so forth, and Sports Illustrateds, that thought, okay, I was going with a blank wall for way too long, and people were constantly complaining with it. All I cared about the content, and they were complaining about the set all the time. So I put together this collage of guys that you could readily name, from the superstars like Doug Flutie to the obscure. We've got Chad Henne up here, as well as a number of other Michigan players that I'm not spotting right this second.
I see Rick Meyer, Ron Paulus down there, maybe?
Oh, yeah, definitely. A.J. Hawk and Calvin Johnson and Keelan Williams and Adrian Peterson and Eric Dickerson, and on down the line, and a few guys that are a little bit more obscure. So it's some good stuff. So it's great to have found somebody of my own kind. That's a good thing. So, Steve, let's talk about this Michigan football team and some of the youth of the football team right now. The 2017 class should be fully entrenched on campus, I would think, at this point. Maybe a few stragglers just hitting Ann Arbor at this point. Donovan Peoples-Jones is a guy that even the fringe fans are excited about. The recruiting nerds get excited about everything, and the offensive guards and everybody. Donovan Peoples-Jones is a guy that can kind of ignite the entire fan base, because we've heard so much about what he can do. Your thoughts about the entire 17 class as Jim Harbaugh really gets to a point where his entire team, his entire personnel is on the roster?
Well, a guy that I used to follow when he was involved covering Michigan for years, who used to be on it when it came to Michigan recruiting, was a guy named Tom Beaver, and for many years he used to run the scout site for Michigan, and he used to always advise his readers to look at recruiting classes in pairs. All right, because so many guys go pro early now. Most of these guys don't redshirt. And so, you don't always necessarily graduate or leave school. There's a lot of attrition nowadays too. You don't always graduate and leave school with your class, right? And so look at recruiting classes in pairs. And if you look at these last two classes that Harbaugh has signed, Mark, for 16 and 17, other than Alabama and maybe Florida State, I mean, I would say Ohio State too. They're right up there with the elite of the elite of the elite. And what's going to be fascinating for our very first episode for Michigan Podcast, I went through the last 4 years of recruiting for all of the major Power 5 schools in college football. And the reason I didn't do 5 years is because there's very few programs that rely on redshirt fifth-year seniors anymore. Heavily, Stanford does. They try to redshirt as many freshmen as they can. But most programs nowadays, since if a kid is good, he's probably leaving after his redshirt sophomore or junior year anyway. You're seeing more freshmen than ever before play. So I just looked at the last 4 years. And what I did is I went to 24/7 Sports where they have the composite recruiting ratings. And I gave 5 points to a 5-star, 4 points to a 4-star, and then 3 points to a 3-star. And then I didn't rate anybody underneath that because to me that's a developmental prospect that's much harder to project and gauge. And then I just added them up for 4 years for all of the 55, I think it is, Power 5 schools. Because I think when we look at teams, Mark, we can't just do what we did when we were kids. Oh, this team's got this many returning starters back and a quarterback. Look at the schedule, project the record. Because if you look at last year's playoff, this is an amazing stat, Mark. Washington, Ohio State, Alabama, and Clemson, all 4 of those teams played at least 9 true freshmen in the college football playoff games they were in, and they all started a true freshman on the offensive line. And they were the best of the best. And so I think when we have so much attrition now with guys leaving early, I don't think returning starters for elite level programs that recruit at that they can get guys like Donovan Peoples-Jones, who looks like he's literally been in a strength and conditioning program for 3 years. If you can get that guy, he gets in December, he's a returning starter, basically. He's not a developmental guy that needs 2 or 3 years like a Braylon Edwards did when he came to Michigan to redshirt and to develop. And so I think we need to look at returning talent more than returning starters. And if you look at the way Clemson has overcome so much attrition on the defensive side of the ball the last 2 years, and they've still been in the national championship game, Alabama every year is losing 8 or 9 guys to the pros, and they return usually 10, 11, 12 starters. That used to not be very much. Doesn't matter to them. The last 2 recruiting classes, Ohio State has lost 15 guys. That's almost 2/3 of an actual class. They haven't skipped a beat. And it's because those schools are recruiting at such a high level that they literally do the old reload thing that maybe 1 or 2 schools in an era used to do, that now we got 4 or 5 schools doing that. And now you see Michigan in the last 2 classes has recruited at that level. And so I think they're the most fascinating team this season. And it's not because they're my favorite team, but the reason why I find them fascinating is because the last 2 classes, they have recruited at the level of the Clemsons, Florida States, Alabamas, and Ohio States. But those head coaches were all there longer, Mark, than Harbaugh. So they had an extra class, 2 or 3, to build that pipeline, to build that infrastructure. And so Harbaugh is essentially in 2017, he's going to try to do in just 2 recruiting classes what all those other names we mentioned try to do in 3 or more. And I will be fascinated to see if they can do it, because when I looked at Michigan's talent roster, they ended up with the 16th most talented roster by point total on my scale. But of all the teams in the top 25, they by far had the most points in the freshman and sophomore classes of 16 and 17. 72% of their roster points came from those players, which means it's going to be arguably the youngest overall team in the Power 5. But one more thing, before Michigan fans panic, last year in Clemson's 2 deep, they had 24 kids that were freshman or sophomore eligible. This year in Michigan's 2 deep, they're going to have 26. And Clemson won the national title last year, and Michigan's roster is going to look a lot like theirs was a year ago.